Let's switch attention now to our weekly Friday feature, Tech Base. And something different. Today is the International Day for Universal Access to Information. And we're asking, how do we as South Africa, how we're doing when it comes to keeping private information safe? How we're doing when it comes to ensuring that public information is accessible? The Information Regulator is created by the Protection of Personal Information Act, or POPIA, and has extensive powers to regulate both the protection of information and also the promotion of access to information. But the regulator's office complained earlier this year that it was struggling with an administrative deadlock, barring it from appointing staff. To discuss, we are joined by the Information Regulator of South Africa, Adv Pantsy Tlakula. Thank you for being with us, Advocate.
Thank you for having us, and good evening.
Is your office up and running?
Well, we are working. What is not up and running is the staff. But we've got good news that in October we'll be advertising positions for the CEO and 5 executive members of staff for the regulator. So we're on course. Yeah,
because you had to go to Treasury. There was conflicts of acts.
Yes.
It really delayed things, basically.
It did, but we have resolved some of that. At least we saw the Minister of Finance, and he allowed us we're going to advertise the positions.
What has this meant, this delay? Because I think your office was established about 2 years ago.
Well, not quite 2 years. It's maybe 18 months ago. Yeah.
But what does it mean for South Africa that there's nobody sort of monitoring this act, nobody protecting access to information on one hand and preventing the leaking of private information?
No, I think what we need to say, you know that the Promotion of Access to Information Act at the moment is monitored by the South African Human Rights Commission. And they've been doing that for the past 18 years. We are going to take over that function from the South African Human Rights Commission once the Protection of Personal Information Act has come into effect, which we hope will happen sometime next year, probably the first half of next year. What is not regulated at the moment is the protection of personal information, because the act has not come into effect.
Okay, so when will that act come into effect, and when will you have the teeth to enforce it?
Let me say parts of it have come into effect. The sections that establish the regulator have come into effect, but the sections that give us power are the ones that have not come into effect. But we're hoping, as I've indicated, that next year, by the first half of next year, the act will have come into effect.
So we're talking about identity theft here? Are we talking about things being released on social media, like criminals' names, numbers? What are the main issues that will be dealt with by POPIA, which will then be administered by your office?
You see, the POPIA prescribes conditions for lawful processing of personal information. Anyone who processes personal information, whether you're a private or public body, you have to comply with the 8 conditions for publishing or for processing personal information. Even people like everybody, even the SABC. Maybe in this piece of paper now you have my personal information. I don't know.
Don't worry, I'll keep it safe, Advocate.
I don't know once I leave here what's going to happen to my personal information. So that personal information has to be processed in a particular way. You have to get, if for instance I want to enter into a contract to buy a cell phone, I go to the cell phone provider, I give them my personal information for the purpose of the contract that I'm entering into with them. They can only use that information for that purpose and that purpose only. But you know where we are sitting, there are lots of companies who are holding our personal information. They are holding our telephone numbers, our cell phone numbers. We don't know where they get them.
Our addresses.
And then they phone us to bombard us with unsolicited direct marketing. So these are all the issues that the regulator is going to be regulating.
I get bombarded, and it's scary when people know your name. You think they may know my address, they may know my ID number.
Exactly.
But it is illegal already.
Well, what I can say is that there are no consequences at the moment for non-compliance with the Act, because the Act has not come into operation. But once it comes into operations, consequences are going to be dire, including an administrative fine of 10 million rands. So at the moment, people are taking advantage of this period before the Act comes into existence.
Is 10 million enough for huge companies making
Of course
billions?
it's not. It's not. I mean, look at Facebook, how much they were fined in the UK. It was just a drop in the ocean, if you consider the kind of money that they are making.
So can you push it up? What are you planning to do?
Well, not quite, because it's prescribed in the law. I think where we are at, we really want to begin to have a conversation. We don't want to come already with a big stick of fining people or prosecuting people for non-compliance. I think we have to begin, and we have begun doing that, to have conversations with public bodies, with private bodies. I must say that the private sector is particularly very cooperative. We have met with a number of private sector players that are taking compliance with POPIA very, very seriously, and we have engagements with them continuously.
So one part of your mandate, I understand, is to look at the leaking of private information. But then we go to something very different, which is access to information, which is also in your domain.
Exactly. And I mean, I like it because we have the mandate for both, which is privacy on one hand and the protection and the promotion of access to information. And we have to find the balance. But at the moment, I think we have a very strong piece of legislation, POPIA, the promotion of access to information, that has been around for 18 years. I think time has come for us to assess that act, particularly as we enter the fourth industrial revolution, because the act does not provide for proactive disclosure of information. You would know now that there are issues that have come up. If you look at the NDP, the National Development Plan, it talks about universal access to information that has to be made through the internet, and that internet has to be made affordable. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they also talk about universal access to affordable internet. Where are we? The digital divide in our country is quite wide. Today, as we're celebrating this important day, the International Day for Universal Access to Information, I was touched by one professional woman who stood up and said, look, when I'm here in Johannesburg, I use 4G, but once I go home to Venda and said I'm going home this weekend, I downgrade to 2G, and I cannot access emails. If anyone sends me emails, I have to come back to Johannesburg for me to be able to access those emails. So we're talking about these lofty, lofty ideals, but access to internet is a problem, particularly for the poor and for the marginalized. And I think it is important for this country to see how they make the internet accessible to young people, to deal with issues of youth unemployment, because young people are very innovative. Once you give them access to internet, if you give them access to affordable data, then they'll be able to use that for
so this sounds like an argument for those free Wi-Fi areas.
Exactly.
Tried it. Will you push our government? Will you use your role to say this is imperative?
I think we need a paradigm shift on how we interpret access to information, because it has been interpreted quite narrowly. But I think in this age that we're in, we have to interpret it to include the internet, because through the internet we'll be able to access information more easily and readily and online.
So will you use your clout?
Yes, I think we need to begin. I mean, the government has these policies in place. The National Development Plan provides for universal access to the internet. The question is whether these, plans have been implemented. I think that's where we need to push, that to ensure that all the policies that have been adopted, the laws that have been adopted, have to be implemented. I think we have spoken enough. There are too many policies in place, and we have to just move and just do it and make sure that we implement.
Give me examples. What information do you think is important? We're talking about a mandate to make sure that information is publicly available. What helps us to be better citizens, more informed citizens?
Let me begin by saying, you know, information, the government is holding information on our behalf. They're just custodians of our information.
It's ours, I like that.
It is ours, it's our information. So they have to make this information proactively available to the citizens. I mean, without information, if you think about it, you cannot exercise any of your rights. Whether you're talking about freedom of assembly, if you want to join an organization, without information about that organization, you will not be able to do that. Whether you're talking about, you know, enjoying social and economic rights that the government is offering, if you don't have information about how and where to access these rights, they remain rights on paper. So access to information means that government has to put out all the information that they have about the services, where we can get them, where we can access them, who to talk to. I mean, up to now, people are sent round the bend. If you want a simple information about where can I, if your street lights are not working, or if you have a problem, you phone and then you send to this one says hold on, and it goes round and round and round, as you know. I mean, we have all experienced that. But if we encourage our government to proactively, you know, release information, make it accessible so that we can be able to access the services that they offer, then it will be easier, because as I've indicated, they are holding that information, which is ours, simply as custodians, because that information does not belong to them.
All right, well, we'll follow developments as your office gets off the ground. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. That was the Information Regulator of South Africa, Advocate Pantsy Tlakula.